You're listening to the Business Club for Grown-Ups podcast with Jessica Fernley.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Business Club for Grown-Ups podcast with me, Jessica Fernley. Today's episode is part 2 of my mini-series on the worst mistakes I've made in my business, and if you haven't already, do make sure you catch up on part 1, which we covered in episode 16. To give you a little recap, in part 1 I talked about how things got a bit out of hand when I was new in my business, and I ended up with £8,000 of credit card debt, and I've been reflecting a lot on that whole experience since I recorded part 1 last month. And it's funny because as much as I felt like it was a terrible mistake in the immediate aftermath of getting to that point of just feeling like, okay, enough, things have to change, I've actually found it a really positive experience to just call it out on the podcast, because I think it's really reframed the whole thing for me. I think internally I was really feeling like, okay, so that was definitely my biggest mistake in my business. But looking back on it now that I've recorded part 1 and put it out there, I've honestly been feeling like, actually, I'm not even sure that's something I feel bad about, because it was dramatic and horribly stressful at the time. And I experienced a ton of really negative emotions about it when it was happening. And I talk about that more in episode 16. I felt ashamed and scared and just way out of my depth at the time. But it also lit a fire under me, and reaching that point where I'd done the conventional thing and worked with a coach and then another coach, and then realised that actually a coach wouldn't be a quick fix for my business. I couldn't delegate that part out. It was going to have to be about me sitting down and fixing my strategy problems and starting to switch off those external voices that were like, buy my course, pay for this, did you know you're doing it wrong if you don't follow my magic formula, plus everyone out there is now using this amazing tool, so you need to as well. That was a really important time in my business. I feel like that's genuinely the moment that I stopped acting scared and feeling like I didn't know how to do it, and realised it was my business. I realised I didn't need to feel powerless and like the answer was out there. It was time to start acting like a grown-up, and that's probably also where my whole idea about the Business Club for Grown-Ups came from. It was down to me to make good decisions and put things right and pay off the debt and move away from this business model of boom and bust, and find a way of doing business that felt more like me. Because I don't know if you've had that experience of seeing someone out there with an amazing business and either talking to them or engaging with their content because you want to find out how they did it, and just feeling like that's great, but that is so not how I want to do things. And it's not like it's necessarily really shady things that they're doing. I worked with a coach who really wanted me to do more on video. It was a really simple strategy, just speaking to camera, less than 1 minute in duration. No big deal, but I could not do it, and trying to be this big extrovert character was just not working for me because, and here's the funny thing, technically when I do Myers-Briggs I come out as an extrovert, but it's literally 51% extrovert, 49% introvert. But when I'm under pressure or feeling overstimulated, if you've read The Highly Sensitive Person you'll know what that means, but it's basically a sort of sensory exhaustion, and it's that feeling where you just want to be at home in your PJs because everything around you is too much. Literally, that book, The Highly Sensitive Person, it changed my life. I found it so helpful. But anyway, when I'm under pressure, when I'm feeling like everything in my life rides on setting up a successful sales funnel, and someone is in my face telling me to do a video because it's really easy, but I'm not finding it easy, and it all feels like a total nightmare. When that happens, I become a complete introvert, and I can't be this huge extrovert personality. In order for me to be my extrovert self, I need to be rested, I need to feel confident, secure, safe, and because of that, I just could not follow someone else's blueprint for overnight success. I feel really strongly that we shouldn't have to become a different person in order to succeed in our businesses. If you have a personal brand, then you shouldn't be trying to be like everyone else, because you're diluting down the thing that makes you truly unique and the thing that will become your biggest selling point. And for me, when I stopped trying to follow the crowd and started talking in my own voice and being authentic and saying the thing which was uncomfortable but was true, that all the secret sauce narrative was frankly a load of BS, I had felt angry about it for a while, because everyone was saying all this stuff about you have to follow this one magic formula to build a business overnight, and it's easy to build an online business. Although then when you worked with a coach, they would say, if it was easy, everyone would do it. And you're just like, okay, that's not what you said before. But instead of just feeling angry beneath the surface and still trying to do all the stuff that everyone else was doing, I just let that anger push me forward and started calling out this really poor business advice that was circulating around online so much. I wrote a blog post that I'll share in the show notes called The Coaching Pyramid and How to Avoid Getting Stung by It, and a few other posts linked to that which felt like a big risk at the time, but it was a really big shift. That was when everything shifted in my business and my mastermind program filled up and I was turning a profit every single month and increasing my income with every relaunch of the program. I paid off my credit cards one at a time. I grew my business. I enjoyed my business, and I enjoyed it even more because I was doing it myself without following someone else's rules. And that low point back in 2016 was really the start of all of that. I think I would even struggle to say at this point that getting into debt was something I wish hadn't happened. It was stressful at the time, and I genuinely didn't know if I'd get out of it without closing the business or how I was going to pay off the debt again, but I did get through it. So I guess it was definitely a bad experience at the time and a mistake for sure, but I learnt so much from it and I still am now. I can't honestly say I regret it. I don't know if I'd be where I am now if I hadn't gone through that whole experience. And it's amazing, and this is proof that it's a great thing to do to own your mistakes. There's something very therapeutic about just being able to say, yes, I messed that up actually. There's no need to pretend that nothing ever happened or that everything's always been a walk in the park. While I was thinking about this, I remembered that my mum always used to say to us growing up, the man who never made any mistakes never did anything. I think her dad used to say that to her when she was little, and in some ways my family are not super adventurous. We've all had a huge fear of failure in our lives that has played out in various ways. But that is a really good piece of advice. When you get in the game, things can get messy. The key thing is, are you going to stick around to fix the mess, or are you going to give up? So this is part 2 of the 3 worst mistakes I've made in my business, and today I'm going to be covering the second and third mistakes from the last 4 years of my business. So the second mistake that I probably kick myself over more than my first mistake of getting into debt is waiting until I felt ready, because at the time I'm recording this, it's January and we're in full swing with everyone's marketing and online business trends for the year ahead. And it's one of those things, I like reading those articles, and I've read 1 or 2 that have been great, but some have been honestly just ridiculously negative. I'm sure you know the kind of thing I mean. Facebook ads are going to get even more expensive. Everyone is going to be using this new technology, and you're thinking, what even is that? I haven't heard of it, let alone know how to use it, and what on earth do I do to learn about it? These articles can sometimes be so negative and make us feel like we're on the defensive before we've even started planning out our strategy. But there is also that little grain of truth to it, isn't there? The online world moves fast. Things that worked 5 years ago don't feel like they work anymore. Things that were novel 5 years ago are now commonplace, and worse than that, they are everywhere. And part of me does feel like one of the biggest mistakes I've made, and probably something I do regret, is that I didn't go bigger with my business when Facebook ads were cheaper, when you could post those visibility posts that people now often find so annoying because they're everywhere. When I first brought my business online in 2015, there were these really exciting Facebook groups for entrepreneurs where people just did visibility posts and booked a ton of discovery calls off the back of it, and then converted a certain percentage of those. That was the strategy we were told to use back then: book discovery calls and work on converting the people who booked. It's actually not one that I enjoyed, and it's not how I do things in my own business because it's become overused and degraded, so that people don't want to get on a call with coaches anymore because people use the hard sell, and often it's used by coaches who are happy to say anything to get you to pay up and then don't deliver the goods. But I do wish that I'd done less lurking in Facebook groups back then and less sitting on the sidelines feeling invisible, and had just thrown myself in and got visible before I was ready. One of the things I've noticed in my business this year is that a lot of my messaging has gone full circle. I redid my website recently and actually found that I didn't need to change any of the wording because my instincts when I wrote a lot of the copy 3 years ago were bang on. I wished I'd trusted my judgment and not felt like I was missing something. But then that's a really important part of it because we aren't born ready necessarily as entrepreneurs, and I did have to go down that path and learn and develop and become ready to be visible in the way that I am now. So I can't blame myself for not being the finished article in the early days, for not being ready, and I certainly can't change the fact that I didn't seize those opportunities back then, but I can change the way I do things now, and you can too. We know that we're running our businesses in a changing landscape. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. Progress is often really good. So the challenge is twofold. Firstly, I always want to make sure that I start before I'm ready, because if you feel ready, then it's probably already too late. And secondly, I want to embrace change in my business and in the wider online world around me. For every strategy or technique that doesn't seem like it works so well, you can guarantee there'll be a new way of doing things. So I want to make sure that when I'm reading about trends for the year ahead, I'm doing that in a positive way that makes me feel excited about the opportunities we'll be facing this year, rather than giving into that scarcity and that fear of change that says, here are all the things that will really suck this year and that won't work. Because, and I have to say, this is one of the things that depresses me most about humanity. Like, what is our problem? I don't know if it's got worse in the last few years, but I just find the news unreadable these days. Everything is doom and gloom. Everything is harrowing headlines and things that just make you feel like the world is a terrible place. You know, here are all the things in your house that will give you cancer. Here are all the ways you're doing life wrong and you'll regret it forever. Here are all the horrific crimes that happened in your area. These huge things are wrong with our world and no one is doing anything about it. Media outlets do it because that's what makes people click or watch or read or buy, but it's just so bleak. And honestly, is that the world we want to live in? Will your business be better off this year if you start out feeling like you're fighting a losing battle? Or will you be better equipped to grow your business and aim for big things if you see the opportunities in front of you? Honestly, don't buy into the scarcity narrative of it's going to be a tough year ahead, you won't survive without my help. Listen to the people who make you feel inspired and empowered and like the opportunities are right in front of you. And I've handpicked a couple of 2019 trend articles. Well, one is a podcast episode, but of the ones I've come across, I found these ones the most inspiring. So firstly, Marie-Helene de Benedetto from Moondust Marketing wrote a brilliantly inspiring piece on Medium recently, so definitely check that out. And secondly, I'm the biggest fan of Jacqueline Malone right now, and she has just launched a solo podcast called the Go-To Gal Podcast, which I really recommend. Her first episode is all about trends to expect in 2019, and I loved it. The links to both of those are in the show notes. So I'm passionate about not sitting on the sidelines or being too scared to embrace change and do things differently in my business. That means being aware of what's going on around us, but also being brave enough to do something first. I started my mastermind program back in 2016 when that wasn't a thing people were doing, and that did really make a change in the way I was doing my business at the time, which was very much a case of see what everyone else is doing, and if something seems like it's working, do it too. So I want to be ready to let my business evolve and grow, even if that means going against the tide. I didn't relaunch my mastermind program last October for the first time in 2 years. Instead, I created the Catalyst program, which is a much higher level program, but it's meant doing work that I really want to do. Instead of just doing my mastermind because that's what everyone has now started to do as well. So there's that external validation. And I've also been selling a new coaching program called Rock Solid for new businesses. And it's so new. It's not even on my website yet, but I'm still selling it. And last year, as you'll know, if you listen to this podcast regularly, I started my membership program, the Business Club for Grown-Ups. And that's a funny one because I had the idea for it in 2015, but I didn't launch it until 2018. So it was great to get it launched at last, but there was definitely this frustration of, why didn't I do that in the first place when I first had the idea? I could have been earning money from the program 2.5 years before I actually was. But more than that, I could have been helping women through the Business Club for Grown-Ups 2.5 years before I actually was. And there were some good reasons why I didn't launch it before I felt ready, because so much of the rest of my business was in flux at the time. I just wanted to focus on my mastermind program and get that properly established, because when I launched it for the first time, I was still learning what to do and how to run a program like that. But I also had some huge things going on in my life outside the business. So relocating 200 miles away with my family, getting settled in a new city, having my second baby, having our house renovated. Sometimes we have to cut ourselves some slack. But the point remains, if there are things in your business that you want to do today, but you're telling yourself you can't do it yet, what are you really waiting for? Because the only thing we regret is not doing these things sooner. Make the most of the things that work now and get ahead on the strategies that are just emerging. Because really, what is the worst thing that can happen? I say this to clients a lot because if you do something in your business like launch a new product or service and it tanks and no one buys or notices, who cares? Because no one notices. We like to think, don't we, that people are watching our every move and making a note of every last detail. But isn't it amazing the times we speak to people who are like, wow, I just did the biggest launch. I'm so exhausted. It was amazing. And you think, really? I don't think I even knew you were launching. And same for when we're the ones launching. However much you feel like you're telling everyone all the time, I can guarantee there are people on your list who don't even realise you're doing anything. I think I've held back at times in the past because I felt like I didn't know what I was doing and I hadn't got it all figured out. Don't feel like something has to be perfect in order to get it out there. Like I said earlier, I've sold places on my Rock Solid coaching program without even having a sales page. I launched my mastermind to 2 people the first time I ran it. I then added 2 more, but that first launch was a bumpy ride. I hadn't created my membership website at that point. I was running it all from Zoom and a Facebook group. But over time, as the program grew and developed, I was able to raise the bar as we went through. If I'd attempted to launch with all these moving parts I'd never tried before, it would have been chaos. So be ready to start small and don't be afraid. If you have an idea, test it. Test it in the background to your main business if you want to, but don't wait until you're ready. The ideas you have and aren't rolling out could be earning you money right now. So the third biggest mistake I've made in my business, and when I was prepping this, it did feel hard at times to just pick one more because there are so many to choose from, which I hope feels encouraging for everyone listening. Because healthy businesses are made from a catalogue of mistakes, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But I think the thing that encapsulates the other issues I've had in my business is that my thinking was just too small. I've covered a huge amount of ground in this area over the last 4 years, and I've said before that so much of the time, the journey you go on with your business is so tightly bound up with the journey you go on as a person. Both have been huge for me, and I can't really separate the two out. My business has changed me so much as a person, and I talk about this more in episode 14, where I talk about the traits that make you a terrible employee, but an excellent entrepreneur. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. But it's been something that was a massive surprise to me when I first started my business, because I think my expectation was that my business costs would mostly be business cards, my website, and I don't know, stationery, because a coaching or consultancy business model is one of the best ones out there in that the capital you need to get the business off the ground is almost nothing. Except I discovered early on in my business that mindset was 100% going to be the biggest investment I'd make, because I struggled with confidence just such a lot. And it's funny because at every stage of business, you assume that all the issues you've dealt with relating to mindset are just 100% water under the bridge. But then as soon as you go up a level, you realise that they're right back with you again. Or rather, I think sometimes you notice that you're feeling a bit of imposter syndrome or feeling less comfortable than usual, or your time management and productivity just goes out of the window again. And then you think, oh wow, I must have gone up another level in my business because all these old friends are back in town. But there can be a real comfort to keeping things small in our businesses. And I think often I feel that in general because I like to be really comfortable when I work, where have a big impact on me, especially if I'm writing content. And I much prefer to work from home because it's the right temperature and I have all the things I need within reach if I'm cold or hungry or whatever it might be. I actually get the best out of myself if I create a really comfortable workspace. But that is completely not the case when I'm planning my business. But when it comes to difference, while on one hand it's great to aim for comfort in the day-to-day things in our business, so making sure you're well rested, you have enough time to do the things you need to in your business, and you're not completely stressed and frazzled emotionally, that's about knowing how to show up as the best version of yourself. But when it comes to setting goals for your business and doing that big picture work that, by the way, I 100% love to do, not about doing what feels comfortable. It's way more important with big picture planning to extend beyond what you think is reasonable. And of course, it's a balance because we don't want to be unrealistic in what we're aiming to achieve in our businesses. But at the same time, it is so easy to play small. Instead of nudging those prices up, we keep them the same, or even worse, we lower them. We go for continuity of our income instead of challenging ourselves to go up a level. And I think that's so easy to do at times. If you have a crossroads in your business where you're really wanting to take that next step, so get your income to $2,000 a month, or turn that $2,000 into $5,000, or even that $15,000 into $20,000, it's really easy to bottle it just a bit and think, actually, as long as it doesn't get any smaller, that's okay. I'm not saying aggressive growth is always the thing we all want to pursue, but it's a problem if you know that in your heart you want to go much bigger in your business, but then every time you're at a crossroads where you could inch up that little bit more, you get scared and just opt to keep things the same. I think we can get this with clients too, especially the clients who aren't our ideal clients and aren't super great to work with. I've seen this a lot and I get it. Sometimes my clients have needed a little pep talk from me because they'd rather retain the client they already have instead of getting out there and finding the clients who they actually want to work with, who will pay what they actually want to be paid. Sometimes we can think way too small. Sometimes we can think small way too much of the time, and it's almost like this internal voice that criticises everything we say and do in our businesses. Well, that voice gets pretty furious when we're going big. Have you found that? Because I definitely have. It's like this continuous loop of self-criticism, and it stops us doing so many things. Who are you to charge that? What makes you think you'll get accepted as a speaker for that event? Do you think that company would want to work with you? They're huge and you're tiny. But I think as I've been in business longer and longer, I've got better at ignoring that voice. Actually, not ignoring that voice, but sassing that voice. I say this to clients often, that we actually have to engage the voice and fight back if we're going to stand our ground and stay in that place of doing big things and taking big action. The way I love to do this is writing down all the critical things that voice is saying when I'm in the middle of doing something. So one thing that for no particular reason really stands out in my mind is I was writing a new opt-in last year. I can't even think which one it was actually. But as I was writing, all these crazy thoughts just kept coming into my head and it was really distracting. So I got a piece of paper and kept it on the table next to me. And every time I had the thought, I wrote it down on the paper and turned back to what I was doing. And it really started to shift my thought patterns actually, because I think often our thoughts are really repetitive. So when I was going through burnout, I was pretty depressed a lot of the time. And honestly, at that stage, I had good reason to be. But I was aware that I was saying to myself probably 1,000 times a day, I'm so depressed. I feel so exhausted. I don't think I can do anything. And I was doing a really similar thing that day when I was trying to write and finding it really tough. I was saying to myself, no one will want to read this. Everyone hates business coaches. GDPR has killed email marketing anyway, really uplifting stuff. But if you'd have asked me at the time if that's what I was thinking, I don't think it was even very conscious. I was just aware of this really discouraged feeling, and I was finding it hard to finish what I'd started writing. Every time I had the negative thought, I just wrote it down on the paper next to me, and it really started to help because I found myself just challenging that negative voice and not accepting the criticism that it was laying down. So when I thought no one will want to read this, I literally found myself thinking, of course they will. I could actually think of specific people in my audience who I knew wanted and needed to read what I was writing. So I knew the voice was wrong. And it felt really natural to just start to counter all of those negative thoughts. I think that's a really important thing to do in that kind of situation, because I also found myself starting to slightly sass that critical voice too. And that's a great way to cope with repetitive thoughts, because they often do cycle round. So when I had the thought again, I was like, well, that's already on the list. What else have you got? And it made me laugh a bit, which really diffused that negativity. And it made me doubt that negative judgment of what I was doing. And I think we can experience a version of this every time we're trying to go bigger in our businesses. And we need to get used to talking back to our inner critic, because that's how it becomes possible to go beyond what feels comfortable. We are so strongly wired to keep ourselves safe, but business is full of risks. Visibility online does not feel safe for all of us. It feels counterintuitive at times. I think when I've played small in my business, it's because I've allowed that inner critic to set the agenda. I think Jen Sincero is great on this topic, by the way. Her book, You're a Badass, is a great thing to be reading if you struggle with this in your business, and we'll link to it in the show notes. It's funny, I always feel so English when I recommend that book because it's such a great title, but it sort of only works in an American accent, which I very much do not have the ability to pull off. Anyway, the big reason why playing small is such a mistake in your business, and why I feel like it's been a mistake in mine, is that it really stops you from seeing the opportunities in front of you. And even when you see the opportunity, it stops you from taking the action that you need to and you should. You know, situation where it's right to want to do something big in your business and end up not doing it. You want to pitch yourself for a podcast or speaking opportunity of some kind, or even just a new client, and you think you're not big enough. Do it anyway. Even if they say no, you'll learn something helpful. And more than that, I think sometimes there's a certain security to having something big on our business bucket list that we never actually get around to doing. So if you shoot for the moon and ask and it doesn't work out, then you need a new big action on your bucket list. And that's a step forward. It might not be a comfortable one, but it's progress. And it's better for you than just having that big thing sitting there, meaning that you don't make yourself do anything courageous in the meantime. If you do get accepted and you're really not ready, so worst case scenario, you're really intimidated and do a bad interview, or you just go to pieces when you speak to the person, or whatever it might be. I'm a terrible one for getting starstruck. I actually dread meeting famous people because it stresses me out so much. I once did a work experience thing at the local BBC studios when I was still a student, and I met presenters of the regional news show, and I was so freaked out to be talking to them. I just could not relax at all. So even if that happens to you, there's something magical that happens when you go beyond what feels comfortable. You just grow. The scary big things you do make the smaller steps you might also need to take feel so much more achievable. It's literally what happens when we go beyond our comfort zone. So sticking with the example of podcast interviews, just say you go on a show that's a little bit out of your league and you don't feel like you've done amazingly well. It's very unlikely that will have a lasting negative impact of any kind, but the plus side for you is that going on a smaller show firstly will be easier because you can leverage the fact that you're on the huge show, but you just won't worry about it in the same way, and that's literally how it works. It doesn't feel nice to go beyond your comfort zone, but it is so rewarding, and that instant rush of adrenaline you feel when you've done it, maybe you were trembling the whole time and you felt sick with nerves, but you did it. Take that, inner critic. We're drawing to a close for this episode. Those are my second and third business mistakes: waiting until I felt ready and thinking too small. To say, I love this as a topic, but I'm really excited for the episodes we have coming up next, because I'm going to be talking about the best problems to have in your business, the things that are oh so painful at the time, but are a sign of brilliant things in your business. But I just wanted to finish today by saying that if you're listening to this and you feel like your business is not going well right now, I hope it will give you some encouragement that there is always a solution to any problem you're facing in your business. It might be that you're directly responsible for the situation your business is in, or it could be that external factors have been at play and are really impacting your business in a way that you can't control, but you still have to fix somehow. Always something you can do. I can't guarantee you'll always like the solution, but if you truly believe that every setback can be an opportunity, you will find the way forward. Entrepreneurs are incredibly resourceful people. We like to solve problems. That's naturally how we roll. So don't put up with mediocre in your business. Don't bury your head in the sand. What if you could have the business you want this year? If that's you and you're ready to get proper help with your business, then head over to my website, jessicafernley.com, and get in touch, because I would love to hear from you. Thank you for listening. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Business Club for Grown-Ups podcast with Jessica Fernley. To find out more, visit thebusinessclubforgrownups.com.